Sabrina the Teenage Witch and the Archies. Right away I hate that it's in the awful manga art style. I can't believe they ever approved that for the Sabrina comic. It just goes without saying it doesn't work for the Archie characters. Their eyes are too far apart, but anyways. Archie apologizes to his band for showing up late and says that a battle of the bands will be held in Greendale next week and all of the proceeds will help an animal shelter. I'd rather see Sabrina. Unless Veronica knows that Sabrina's a witch, there's no reason for her to respond to the idea of her knowing about the contest with, like we need any more competition, because Sabrina isn't known for being musically talented. But if she used magic to appear that way around her, that makes sense. But that's something the real Sabrina would do, while manga Sabrina almost never uses magic on Earth, making any scenes there incredibly boring and pointless, as the longer a Sabrina story goes without magic, the more boring it gets. Archie generously sends Sabrina a text message, and Sabrina of course confirms to her friends that she used to live in Riverdale. It'd be common sense to explain why she moved away from it, which we've been wondering about for years, otherwise I can't take that seriously. Shinji thinks the ladies wouldn't be able to resist him if he won the band contest and got those pricey clothes. I guess it assumes that it'd be too embarrassing to try to learn about men's fashion and pick up a magazine on it to get the appropriate clothes snapped up. Why can't he just Google it? Why doesn't he just say a spell to zap up copies of Perfection's prize clothes instead of even considering this? Even Sabrina daydreams about making Amy jealous with those clothes. Why wouldn't she cast a spell for that? Why can't she just look in a fashion magazine for expensive up-to-date clothes? I guess the reason she doesn't zap them up all the time is that she'd be asked how her aunts afford them when she hasn't been wearing expensive clothes her whole life. But all she'd have to say is that one of her aunts got a new job to justify it. When you've got three characters who can summon anything they see, they don't have an excuse for wanting to go through all the hard work of entering a contest to win a prize, especially since it's a prize that Sabrina's friends want to get. So it would be uncharacteristically disloyal of her to enter the contest for a prize she can zap up anyways to take it away from Archie. I have to assume that these characters will enter the contest just for fun, because that's the only real excuse for it. And even then, it'd only be justified in character if they plan on giving the prizes away to the Archies after winning. It's also impossible to take seriously that Landry even points out that none of them can play an instrument or carry a tune, as if that matters when they're witches. Shinji wants to use magic for it, and she says that if they're gonna compete, they should do it fairly. And Sabrina agrees that magic would be cheating, and wonders how hard it could be to play one song because she's an idiot. But I'm guessing magic will be used anyways. I thought in the next panel her friends and her would do a horrible job playing music and singing, so it's a nice surprise that after she says that doesn't happen. The Archies show up in Greendale, not saying anything interesting about it to explain what sets it apart from Riverdale. And they go to the recreation center and meet Sabrina's charm school friends, and plan on practicing music in the same building as each other. Shinji flirts with Veronica, showing off his character, and the story starts dragging on, not having any magic happen, causing me to stop caring. It's obvious they bite off more than they can chew by having one Sabrina story last a whole issue. Eventually Archie finds out that all of his friends aren't interested in practicing. Veronica wants Shinji to show her around Greendale, as somehow none of Sabrina's old friends have made fun of his ridiculous appearance. And Landra and Betty want to go check out the animal shelter all of a sudden for no reason, while Reggie wants to play basketball all of a sudden. It makes sense that an experienced band wouldn't think they need practice, and Sabrina's friends have every reason to assume practice would be pointless and they'd be guaranteed to suck anyways. It's established in the Sabrina manga that the mortals all see Salem as just a stuffed animal. So it makes no sense that Jughead would see Salem acting like a cat and not get confused when he looks nothing like a real cat. In the Sabrina manga, Amy talks as if it's a stuffed animal. But I like that Salem's thoughts lampshade that he's like Jughead. The next day, Veronica tells Archie she got back late last night because Shinji kept intentionally getting lost while showing her around, and they're up next to play. Shinji apologizes to Sabrina for oversleeping. Too bad he's too stubborn to have an alarm clock. How did he sleep until 3 p.m.? Being unusually smart, Sabrina wisely says that they should drop out of the competition, but I know they won't. Landra at least justifies that this is for a good cause, but it wouldn't be worth humiliating themselves in front of a bunch of people who'd never let them forget it. Sabrina tells the Archies they did great, and Archie thanks Sabrina and wishes her good luck, and Veronica says she'll be watching them. Sabrina's friends hate the band name she took it upon herself to come up with, without asking them permission first. Sabrina's only got 2 defined character traits throughout the franchise, being an impulsively magic-prone goody two-shoes. So why would she do this to them? Shinji's a guy, she'd know that he'd hate the name. It makes sense that Shinji uses magic to cheat because he's the least moral one of their group. And his friends assume that they do best under pressure. Just before the winner could get announced, Josie and the Pussycats show up looking awful. It would have seemed like a missed opportunity to some people if they didn't show up. But since there was no foreshadowing in the story that they would, other than the fact that this is a band contest, I'm just disappointed at them being here because it's so predictable that it goes back to being unpredictable. It would have been so much more likely that they would have been busy somewhere else, playing a concert somewhere else. None of them have personalities in this story, so I have no reason to care about them. Go figure, they win first prize. Veronica has every reason to get mad at them for winning because they probably already have a closet full of Perfection brand fashions. Sabrina complains that she'll never get to make Amy jealous because she's a complete idiot who's somehow been too stupid to think that she could just zap up expensive clothes and say their aunt got a high-paying job. Then out of complete nowhere, it turns out the grand prize is from a cat food company called Perfection, and it's a lifetime supply of gourmet cat food. This is hopefully an intentional reference to Jem's cat in the 2000s comic who's called Perfection. Though why the writer would want or think we'd want a reference to that comic is beyond me. I'd say hopefully because that's the only explanation for why this would happen. Obviously everyone would have known that it wasn't spelled the way that the word perfection is from the start, because they would have seen how it was spelled somewhere, like on a poster. And obviously nobody would offer cat food as a prize for a band contest. This was just a pathetic excuse for a joke that comes out of nowhere. The people offering the prize should have known that the prize would be really disappointing. The Pussycats are made the new spokeswomen for the cat food. You'd think they would have to agree to that first. I do like that they hated their prize though, because they did arrive late out of nowhere and steal the show in Sabrina. I'm not sure it's realistic that they would be allowed to perform when he was just about to announce the winner. And that's the end of the story? I thought they'd give away their prize to Sabrina because she'd say she has a cat. That was a really sudden ending. I'm glad the story only had 14 pages. It still felt slow-paced because there was practically no magic and took place on Earth, but it's lightning fast pacing for a manga Sabrina story. This horribly drawn issue by Tanya Del Rio was about Sabrina and her charm school friends meeting the Archies because of a Battle of the Bands contest. And while it had to involve the Archie gang being in a band because it's slightly more interesting, it felt arbitrary because they're barely ever a band when Sabrina's in a story with them. The issue was boring because the entire time, the only time magic was used was when Shinji predictably cheated at the contest. Good thing Sabrina lost, even if the Pussycats could have easily not shown up. The plot's so basic and predictable that there's nothing to say about its events. So I'm relieved it was half as long as I expected. While I looked forward to seeing what the conflict would be to keep me invested, there wasn't really anything because coming up with that would be effort. And instead you know exactly what you're going to get out of the story from the cover. I felt like there was no point in even having the Sabrina characters in the story because it could have been characters who actually were good musicians for all the difference it made. And obviously most people would hate the art of the issue so much that they wouldn't give the Sabrina manga a chance just because of this issue that isn't in one of the real Archie comics anyways. People would have to go out of their way to buy this. None of the story arc plot threads of the Sabrina manga show up, or even get alluded to, because it's too early. So besides Shinji and the boring Landra being here, there's nothing to advertise what the Sabrina manga's appeal is supposed to be. So it really fails as an advertisement. It seems pointless to introduce these cast of characters to each other. I bet Landra and Shinji never show up in the Archie comics beyond their own comic. At no point did the manga Sabrina have comedy pages in Archie comics beyond her own after all. Thankfully. Which hopefully implies that the staff knew it was hated. Or at least had a very niche audience. It showed off the one-dimensional personalities of all of the characters, so it was how you'd expect. But I was expecting more. I felt like the story did the bare minimum by the end, with no genuine conflicts throughout the story. The writer somehow thought that Sabrina's bands being inexperienced and not planning on using magic would be good enough for something for Sabrina to worry about. But it was obvious magic would be used, because if they humiliated themselves, it'd be too depressing. It felt like a missed opportunity by refusing to finally explain why Sabrina moved to Greendale and what the difference between it and Riverdale are besides location, which would have given this issue a point. At least none of the scenes were pointless, and they didn't drag on with bad humor or needless melodrama. So this is one of the top 10 best manga Sabrina stories ever. But it doesn't take much to achieve that, because the manga is literally the worst comic I ever read. I was so bored that I was looking forward to it ending from the first page, as it's stuck on Earth with almost no magic, so there's never anything interesting going on that would get me to care about it. Archie's Palace and Gowns Double Digest 86. Sabrina complains to Hilda about all of the trash on the beach, and Hilda wants to do something about it, probably because she hates the way the trash looks, and decides to go give the captain of the polluting SCO a punishment. So she uses her magic to turn herself and Sabrina into giant sea animals, which right away makes the captain wonder if someone spiked his morning drink to make him hallucinate. I guess the octopus is Hilda because she's wearing a blue hat. She asks cathartically, "How'd you like it if someone dumped garbage into your living room?" It's too bad we don't literally see her do that, so we'll know how it feels and learn its lesson better, instead of just feeling like the victim and getting poked in the back by a swordfish. He asks them to take their apparitions away. So rather than being dumb enough to assume they're literally talking sea animals, he immediately thinks they might be mere apparitions, even though he can feel them just fine. And the witch hat on the octopus is probably what gave it away to him that it's still magical. He promises to never dump garbage in the ocean again. But how do we know he'll keep that promise? He might just dismiss the whole experience as a hallucination or dream. It'd be more effective if Hilda pointed to magically guarantee that he won't go back on this. Then Hilda flies on a broomstick over a polluting factory. Why? She just felt like getting more revenge after seeing that litter. She wouldn't have flown over this by accident on her way home, because she'd see it coming. Naturally, she decides to visit the one responsible for this, and she takes him on a flight up to the pollution while she and Sabrina have gas masks on, which caused them to promise to cut down on its factory's pollution. No wonder I was asking why this wasn't done with a factory owner in an earlier story. I was remembering this. The guy wasn't established to be completely unlikable like that guy, so he doesn't frustrate me. Hilda says, "And if you go back on your word, we'll be back." I'm glad she said that to reassure the audience that he won't. I guess the writer thought it'd be sappy if the story was nothing but uplifting wish fulfillment on his part, because then he suddenly has things go south for Sabrina, as Sabrina thinks that witch's brew is yucky, when you'd think she'd find a spell in the magic book for making it taste like strawberry milkshake to her. I thought it was unnecessary to make Sabrina hate how witch's brew tastes. She suddenly tells Hilda that they're polluting with the fire from the cauldron, when normally we never see pollution come from the cauldron during the potion making process. So it must just be this specific type of brew that does it. So she's cleverly trying to talk her into not making her drink witch's brew. I can tell she's doing this on purpose because she smiles afterwards. I guess the writer forgot that Hilda said that they need to keep making witch's brew because otherwise they won't be able to keep their magical powers. Hilda used a blender to make cold witch's brew, which is apparently a thing. The story ends with Sabrina being forced to drink disgusting cold witch's brew instead. Again, she just used magic to make it taste good to her. Couldn't they teleport it directly into their stomachs? For the most part, this was a satisfying story. This is how I'd expect witches to punish polluters. Although it is a lazy story in that it's very easy to come up with. At least it's a bit inventive that it starts out with Hilda hating beach pollution instead of the story starting out with or exclusively complaining about air pollution. This makes sense as an excuse for the plot because it's natural of Hilda to discover the litter when going to the beach. After I guess Sabrina talked her into going there, saying that she'd love it. Normally, Hilda hates the beach and asks why she'd want to go. I just hate the ending of the story. It was needlessly mean to Sabrina. Sabrina's 2004 origin story by George Glatter. The 50 Magical Stories Sabrina collection as an origin story for Sabrina written by the creator of the Sabrina series. Too bad it's got really crappy art, so it's very hard to care about it. It starts at her 16th birthday party, just like in the 90s comic. But it's depressing because a mean girl convinced almost everyone to not show up at her party. She's told that now she knows who her true friends are, and her aunt uses magic to make her cake look gigantic and reveals that they're both witches. And she doesn't believe them at first. So you can tell the story is written in 2004 because if this was written earlier, she would have known she was a witch even as a kid because she did in the Little Sabrina stories before this. So this isn't how her origin story was actually meant to be. It's just taking too much influence from the more recent Sabrina series, which are just reinterpretations of his original idea. So I don't know why he's copying them. It's even more confusing because the 2000 Sabrina comic has Sabrina know that she's a witch before her 16th birthday party, but apparently the creator would rather take inspiration from the 90s sitcom. Speaking of copying, I hate that Westbridge was crossed out and replaced with Greendale, because it reminds me of the shitty animated series and Up, and I don't know why that happened when that wasn't his original vision for the franchise at all. Neither is Westbridge. If this was a real origin story, her hometown would be called Riverdale. This is like if Sonic was given a long-lost origin story by the creator of Sonic, but it involved modern Sonic characters and lore and settings. Sabrina's told that she has two options. She can stay at home and let her aunts teach her magic, or go away to the Witches' Academy for training. It reminds her of Harry Potter, which is probably the only reason she even considered agreeing to go there instead of letting her aunts teach her, which she'd be more comfortable with because she's familiar with them and trusts them. It wouldn't be as intimidating to see her aunts use magic. Instead, she's told to go find the Witches' Council in the unused closet upstairs for further details. Even though they're the government, so they would have better things to do than tell every single witch upon her 16th birthday that she's a witch and what she can do about it. There's an interesting detail that she has to turn around 3 times to warp in the closet. I like it because it means you can't use it by accident, even if it completely contradicts the earlier canon. She goes into the wrong closet at first and is covered in clothes and hangers. At least there's a joke here. But I don't need to see her talk to the Witches' Council on her first day as a witch when I already saw her do that in her first episode in the sitcom. So that's lazy too. What's the point of an origin story by the original creator if it's not his ideas? No wonder the story wasn't officially published. It's just redundant and pointless. The Witches' Council were expecting Sabrina to show up, which makes more sense than the sitcom where she shows up when they're in the middle of work unpunished. Why is the dark arts even written in the first place? Magic was never called that in Sabrina. It reminds me of how it was in the 70s style of Sabrina. One of the members of the Witches' Council isn't happy that Sabrina has a really small magic finger. Since when do witches have an oversized magic finger? And her body doesn't have a mole, birthmark, or wart. That takes advantage of how witches were originally portrayed in the series. So for once, that's how it would have been written at the beginning. But while I prefer the name Witches' Council, it would have been called the Witches' Coven if it was written at the start of the series. And where's Gull the Head Witch? Sabrina comes back home and tells her aunts that while she doesn't know how she'll manage without them, she's miserable at her own high school. Which is sort of a believable justification, since we know she's being bullied there by the not Libby. That's another thing I saw right away. If this was come up with at the start of the series like an origin story should have been, there wouldn't be a shitty female bully character cliche like Libby. Another thing that's more recent about the story is that we see the thoughts of what's probably Salem. When that took a couple years to be the case in the series, Sabrina's told she'll go to school with a special dumpster, which is at least creative. And she goes to the wrong dumpster. She's told goodbye as Salem talks, which is definitely a 90s thing. Sabrina's narration explains that the Witches' Academy has bright and cheery buildings, which is realistic, even if it's not how the 70s comic would be. The students are flying segways, and you have to be an upperclassman to rate one of those. She's told that the computers all operate on voice control. And if the writer thought of the obvious problem with that and someone said, providing you enunciate clearly and properly, if that's a problem with it, then it really would be better to have a mouse as well. So that's not believable. The sports and recreational facilities show Sabrina people surfing without surfboards, and Sabrina somehow thinks that'd be difficult. The school lunchroom has a huge conveyor belt full of treats, and they just have to point to make their selections. I love that the magic school not only isn't depressing and oppressive like I expected with the tone of the story, but it goes out of its way to not be like Harry Potter. It's creative while still as magical as possible. If only the story skipped to this point. This is great! It turns out the students at school complained about Sabrina's mother being a geeky mortal. I guess because she told someone, because she's too trusting. And because there were 9 female students for every male student, it was hard to get a boyfriend because of so much competition. At least witches being more likely to be women makes them different and takes advantage of the witch concept as a result, because you usually imagine them to be women. But since witches look just like humans, it doesn't seem to make sense that they'd have a different gender ratio. Only a magical curse would explain that, and you'd think eventually a bunch of warlocks wouldn't do that. But then it just got changed back. The boys are used to the girls zapping up stuff like sundaes to impress them. Sabrina ended up becoming friends with the descendant of the most famous witch of the Salem witch trials, who the students want autographs from. So her popularity soared, and she was joined by other people who shared her live and let live attitude, including a guy who had computer wizardry and told his talking computer that it was incorrect. Their classes usually focused on practical matters, like having 10 seconds to remove a prospective bride's tattoo that honored an old flame. It wouldn't require 10 seconds to do that. It'd be instant. How would imagining that skin doesn't have a tattoo on it not be as easy as it looks? Sabrina was shown how well she could do at bowling with her magic. Seen it. And at exam time, one time they had to ride a unicorn over hurdles, and the only hard part was making the crocodiles cough up some of the riders. Well, that's too dark. She ranked 3rd in her class and was the vice president. But after being congratulated by the principal for doing so well, she decided to withdraw early because the year of witch school gave her the confidence to deal with any problem. Confidence and self-esteem mean the same thing, so that's redundant. She is conveniently allowed to leave right away because this writer has better writing sense than Tanya Del Rio, and returns home to be taught by her aunts, who say they missed her. She went back to high school in the fall, and now I'm wondering how in the world nobody in the mortal world questioned her being gone for a year. The only way this would make sense is if there was a Sabrina duplicate that was sent to the high school to pretend to be her. Or the Witches' Academy has a different time speed, so in the year she was there, only a month passed back home. Oh no, don't explain that. She zaps up a skunk to spray the mean girl and make her cronies run away, and that's the end of the story. I hated how derivative the beginning of the story was, ripping off modern reinterpretations of the franchise, which confuses me because this was written by the original creator of the series from back in the 60s. So I don't know why he wanted to make it rip off the 90s sitcom and comics so much. But it kept taking me out of the story and boring me because this clearly isn't how the original vision of the origin story for Sabrina would actually be, if it was planned all along. So that's not what I wanted to see. The magic school was easily the best part, impressing me by being creative and mostly optimistic and cool, using magic as much as possible. But it was hard to take seriously because they were too lazy and greedy to get a real artist to draw it. So the art was the worst I've ever seen. But I've read a lot worse stories than this. If only it started at the part where she was at the magic school, it would have been good, instead of having a depressing beginning.